Welcome to the Antioch Podcast, designed to nurture knowledge, cultivate creativity, heal the heart, and strengthen for service. Thanks for listening, and welcome home.
So there's just a different atmosphere in the room this morning. I want to acknowledge it. Obviously we never take communion like that. That was different than how we normally do it. But there's something in my spirit that is crying out for this idea of falling in love with Jesus again. And that's something that's hard to do as a group. That's something that you kind of have to do as an individual. As a group, as a community, as a body of believers, as the body of Christ, there's a lot we can do. There's so much more we can do together than we can do apart. There are some battles that are we battles that you can't fight by yourself. And I'm so incredibly thankful for the church, but this morning I'm just really seeing this the importance of the intentionality of you yourself leaning into the presence of God. And I know this is nothing new. This is so simple. This is such a basic idea. You have to have a personal relationship with Jesus. And I get that. We say that a lot, but there's just something this morning. I feel like we just need to take the time to connect with him. And I think sometimes we come to church, and this is sometimes a good thing, where it's like, well, if I could just get to church, it's going to be okay. And there are definitely times in my life where that has been the case. But there also has to be this thing in your life where it's like, I just need to get away from everything, and it's going to be okay. That prayer closet experience, that one-on-one with Jesus relationship, where it's not defined by anything other than your relationship with him. Sorry, none of this is what I'm planning on sharing today. I just really feel like I need to say this because I feel like maybe someone in here needs to hear this. And wouldn't it be just like Jesus to interrupt all of this just to speak to one person in here specifically? So I guess I just feel like I should say, take the time. It's not a matter of salvation. I don't feel that way. It's just take the time to be with Jesus. Learn to fall in love with him all over again. The answer you're looking for is in that. The answer you're looking for is in that. Okay. That's it from that. Just all of that, it's just gone now. So I don't know what that was, but hopefully that ministered to somebody or will minister to them this week as they lean in. Maybe it was for me. I'll pray about that. Okay. So 2 weeks ago, we left on quite a cliffhanger. We talked about what are the implications of there being no God. What does that mean? Like if there is no God, and what we looked at, it means ultimately there's no value, no purpose, and no meaning to life. There isn't even a possibility of those. You could have temporary value or purpose or meaning, but ultimate value, meaning, purpose, no. None of that exists at all in the absence of the existence of God. And we left off with Pascal's wager. Knowing that if there is no God, there is no ultimate value, meaning, purpose to your life. And knowing that if there is a God, that there is ultimate meaning, value, and purpose in your life. Pascal's wager basically says the wise person, the practical person, the reasonable person should choose to believe. And the reason they should choose to believe is because if they believe and they're right, they've gained everything. If they believe and they're wrong, they've lost nothing. They've lived a life where they felt like they were accomplishing stuff and they had value and purpose in their life. It ended all being not true and they just ceased to exist, but nothing was lost. However, if you choose to not believe in God and you're right, you gain nothing. I mean, I guess the only gain you could possibly get from that is like bragging rights, but you'll be dead by the time you know, so you won't be able to brag anyway. And what if you're wrong? If you choose to not believe and you're wrong, you've lost everything. You've lost everything that you were made for, both in this age and in the age to come. So the wise person understands I have everything to win and nothing to lose. And all things being equal, I should choose to believe that God exists and I should choose to live my life in such a way. But if the rational, reasonable person should choose to believe in God, all things being equal, if the scales are perfectly balanced, you should choose to believe in the existence of God. What if there were things to tip the scale? What if all things weren't equal? Then what should we do? Are there reasons to believe that God exists? Like good, reasonable, rational reasons to believe that God exists. Is there anything to tip the scale on the side of God? And that's what I want to talk about today. The hard part about this is, unfortunately, I would say in the last 30 years, I've definitely seen this in the time that I've been a teacher for the past 26 years. We have moved farther and farther and farther away from being able to have rational discourse and make decisions based on rational discourse. For example, I was at a math conference once, and it was all math teachers that are at this math conference. And some of you may have heard this story before, I apologize, but it's just in my head, so I'm going to share it with you. It's all math teachers of mathematics. All of them have their degree in mathematics, and we're sitting around talking about math. And one of the things that came up was this idea of, I'm trying to think how I could explain this to you without you revolting and throwing things at me because it's too mathematically focused. We're talking about how to maximize area for perimeter or maximize volume for surface area. I know, very exciting stuff. You're all totally down for this. Anyway, they had like the different corners of the room, and they said if you believe model A is going to maximize the volume, go to corner A. If you believe model B is going to maximize it, go to corner B. If you believe that C is going, or if you believe neither of them, it's going to be exactly the same, go to corner C. And so people split up, and it was almost evenly split. About a third went to A, a third went to B, a third went to C, which first of all, very disheartening with a group of mathematicians that they don't understand how volume and surface area works. But whatever, I'm just letting it go. They all had their degrees in it. I just don't get how that happened. But that's not the part that really bothered me, because you know what? You forget things. You forget a lot of things. I just looked at my multivariable calculus booklet that I had from when I was in college, and I looked at it, I'm like, I don't know what any of this means. Like someone else must have wrote this. I showed it to Colette because she just finished taking her class. I'm like, does this mean anything? She's like, oh yeah, I totally know that. I'm like, I don't get it at all. You forget things, so okay, fine. But then what happened was, once everyone went into their corners, the person leading the thing said, would anyone like to explain why you chose the corner you chose? And almost everyone said, well, it just seems like that would be the answer. That seems obvious. And I said, well, I'd like to share. I said, I've actually been teaching calculus for quite some time, and I can tell you that volume is maximized when the surface area, for surface area, when you get closer to a sphere. So the closest to a sphere you could get, the better the proportion is. Are you still with me? Have I lost you already? Okay. So, and then I went through and I showed a mathematical proof, step by step, lying out exactly why it is maximized, using the equations they all know. It wasn't like weird stuff. It was all basic equations that they all knew, they were all familiar with. And I got through to the end, and proof, QED, got to the end. Afterwards, the instructor said, would anyone like to change the corners where they're at? Nobody moved. A little bit later at the same conference, by the way, I was asked not to return after lunch because the guy leading is like, there's no point in you being here. Just, you're fine. And everyone's getting frustrated. The next part, they went through and they're like, let's talk about games you can play with your classes when you're teaching them mathematics. And they're talking about square roots. And like, so what you would do is you'd like say, okay, the operation we're doing is square roots. So you would say, okay, so I'm going to say 4, and then the student has to say what the square root of 4 is. So they go 2. Right, very good. So they're doing this, and they're like, let us show you how this works. Like 4, so it says 2. And then she goes to the next person, 16. They go 4. And then the next one, they go 25. And the guy goes plus and minus 5. He was so proud of himself. And then everyone else goes, ooh. And I go, not ooh. That is wrong. That's not correct. That's wrong. And they said, well, that's your opinion. I'm like, no. This is math. This isn't subjective. This is not my opinion. And they're like, well, what do you mean? The person leading it, can you explain what you mean? I say, yes. There's only a positive root if you're dealing with the square root. The square root function, and I showed them the domain and the range are all positives. It's just these positive values. There are no negative values in the square root function. And they said, no. When you take the square root, there's a positive and negative root. Like, I understand what you're saying. It's when you're solving a quadratic that has positive and negative, like a parabola. It's on both sides, positive and negative. Like when you're solving that, you have positive and negative answers. So the process, you take the square root to solve a quadratic, but the square root itself only has positive values, which is why you have to state plus and minus square root, because it only has positive. Are you with me at all still? Yeah. I went through, eventually, we got to the end. The guy who said the plus and minus 5 was very angry with me at this point. And he goes, yeah, agree to disagree. I'm like, no. You are a math teacher. I just provided an argument based on reason and logic. I showed you the graph, which we agreed is the graph of the square root of x. I laid out a reasonable defense. And even amongst mathematicians, they didn't believe. This is why I want to just begin by saying, a lot of times when we talk about apologetics, it's this idea like, I'm going to use apologetics and I'm going to convince people that God exists. But even God, as C.S. Lewis says, cannot ravish, he can only woo. The primary purpose of apologetics isn't to give you ammunition to prove someone wrong. It isn't to give you ammunition to make them believe. That's not going to happen. The primary purpose of apologetics, in my perspective, is to remove obstacles for people that are having a hard time believing because of that. And honestly, to help encourage you when you struggle with doubt. And if this is the first time you've ever heard from a pastor I apologize for this, but as a follower of Jesus, you will have times when you struggle with doubt. I have times when I struggle with doubt. Everyone who's been following Jesus is going to have these struggles. And there's something about apologetics that reminds me, okay, I have good reasons to believe it. It's not just because I want to believe it. There's good, rational reasons why I should choose to believe this. Even when I'm going through a difficult time, even when I'm hurting, even when it seems like God is not there, I have good reasons to believe that He is. And maybe my feelings are off right now, because they often are. So apologetics, I think, is primarily for the believer, not the unbeliever. And it's a way that we can encourage ourselves and have faith during times of doubt and struggle. And also, as C.S. Lewis said, good philosophy must exist if for no other reason than to answer bad philosophy. We need to be able to have a reason for the hope that we have. We need to be able to give people answers to the questions they have. Not because it's going to force them to believe, but it's going to remove those obstacles that make it difficult. Does that make sense? And the hardest part is we're now living in a time when rational discourse just isn't very effective. But for people who are seeking, it will help. So the second kind of thing I want to say before I get into some of these arguments is they're more arguments. They're not really proofs. We call them proofs sometimes, but what I mean by proof isn't like Euclidean proof, geometric proofs, where like, okay, well, there it is. It's proven. We're done. There's nothing more to talk about. These are more just arguments. It's evidence that we look at. And that evidence is incredibly important because we want to look at all of the evidence and make our decisions based on where the evidence is leading, not based on what we want it to be. We want to look at all the information, look at all the evidence, look at all the details, all of the arguments, and we want to make our decisions based off of that. That is a wise way to move forward. Third little statement I want to make before I get into it is this. If you are determined to not believe in God, as most naturalists are, you are going to dismiss all of these arguments from the very beginning saying, oh, it's a leaky bucket because I can poke some holes in it. Even though generally it looks like that's accurate, I can poke some holes in it and it will leak. And I get that, and there's something to that. But here's what I want to say about that. What I'm about to give to you is what's called a cumulative case. So I'm not putting everything in one bucket and that one bucket is going to leak out. I'm taking 5 or 6, I don't know how many we'll get through today, probably not many. I'm going to take 5 or 6 different buckets and stack them. And even if you had a leaky bucket, if you have a leaky bucket and you stack it in another and in another and in another and in another, it's going to hold the water. So this is a cumulative case argument when we are considering it. And again, all we have to do is show that it's slightly more likely that God exists to really put Pascal's wager way over the end, and you should choose to believe that God exists. So, that being said, let's look at some arguments. Now, each of these arguments I could easily spend 3 hours talking to you about. And I'm going to somehow do them in 5 minutes. So please understand, I'm not doing a thorough job. It's not because I can't do a thorough job. It's because we just don't have the time, and this isn't a lecture. So if you'd like to do a lecture sometime, I'd be happy to put that together. It'd be fantastic. And honestly, I would probably want to draw some other people in because there's others who could probably do a better job than I can with this. But I'm just going to hopefully whet your appetite to look into this some more. So, are we ready? We're going to engage our minds this morning. We're going to worship the Lord with all of our minds as we go through these very quickly. The first one I'm going to talk about is the cosmological argument, which basically states that there must have been a first cause or a sufficient reason for the existence of the universe. There are several different cosmological arguments. The one I prefer, I personally really like, is the Kalam cosmological argument. This was put forward by a Muslim philosopher. And basically the argument goes something like this. Statement 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Statement 2, the universe began to exist. And conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, this is a very simple argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, if the premises are true, the conclusion naturally follows. There's no way to avoid it. So the question is, what about the premises? Do we have good reasons to think those are true? The first one, whatever begins to exist has a cause. So this idea, I could spend 3 hours. I only have a couple minutes that I'm giving myself for this. But think of trying to deny this, that whatever begins to exist has a cause. That would mean that randomly, at different times, objects would pop into existence out of nothing. But all of our experience, all of our scientific background, we have never seen something like that happening, where something comes into existence, into being, out of nothing. It just, like all of a sudden, walking down the street, oh, there's an elephant in the street right now. Like, that doesn't happen. And if you saw an elephant running down the street, which, by the way, happened in Riverside quite a while ago, you wouldn't think, wow, that's fascinating. That elephant just came into existence out of nowhere. No, you would think, where did that elephant come from? What caused that to be here? When you see Stonehenge, you don't think, oh, that's so interesting that these rocks just happened to show up. No, what put them here? What caused those to be here? We understand very intuitively that anything that begins to exist has a cause. Something had to make it come into existence. Something had to put it there, so to speak. The second statement, the universe began to exist. We can look at the justification for this philosophically. We can also look at it scientifically. Scientifically, we have, just to make it nice and simple, the second law of thermodynamics. The universe is using up its usable energy, and if the universe existed forever, for all of eternity, it would have used up its usable energy infinitely long ago. Or the universe is expanding. We know that the universe is expanding. Well, if the universe is expanding and it existed forever, that means you could run the clock backwards and it would contract, but at some point, you reach a beginning state. Again, these are very oversimplified, but basically what I'm trying to get at is it used to be very common amongst especially atheistic philosophers to say the universe is eternal. It never began to exist. But everything in cosmology tends to point now to the beginning of the existence of the universe. Philosophically, it's impossible to traverse an actual infinite. Actual infinities don't really exist. If you believe that actual infinities actually exist, you run into all these crazy contradictions that don't work out. We have good reasons to believe the second statement, that the universe began to exist. Well, if the first one is pretty solid, whatever begins to exist has a cause, and the second one is solid, the universe began to exist, then the third also would be the universe has a cause. Now, by the way, I will point out, some have tried to push back on this. Well, I'll talk about it later. Let's keep going. Here are the implications of this. God is eternal, timeless, immaterial, and omnipotent, and in control of all things. Because whatever created the universe had to be outside of the universe. And the universe is all of time and space and matter. So whatever created it must be eternal. It must be immaterial. It must be incredibly powerful to be able to choose to do and create something like that. Or, as the Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Second argument is the teleological argument. The argument from design to an intelligent designer. When we look at the design in the universe, it screams that there had to be a designer, because you can't have a design without having a designer for it. There are two that I'm going to look at with this. The first is the fine-tuning of the universe. Oh, goodness. Strap on your seatbelts. This is a tough one. There are two conditions that imply the action of an intelligent agent. Are you guys okay? Yeah. Are you sure? Yeah, okay. The first is, so the two conditions that imply there had to be an intelligent agent behind this. The first one is very small probability. Now, small probability on its own isn't enough. Like, you have a very small probability of winning the lottery, but people win the lottery every single time. Well, close to every single time. Hopefully one of you will, and you'll remember the importance of tithing. Just saying. Okay, so small probability, but small probability isn't enough. The second is independent specifiability. Or another way to say it is special significance to what happened. So, for example, if you were playing cards with Jude, for example, and he were to deal himself a perfect bridge hand, and you got dealt literally nothing in your hand, every single card didn't work together at all, you've got nothing to go on. Okay, so here's the thing. Both of the dealings have are equally improbable. The probability of either hand is exactly the same. But once you put it in the context of the fact that you are gambling and playing this card game, and the person dealing it happened to get the one that was the perfect one, and everyone else got nothing, all of a sudden there's this independent specifiability. Another example of this, let's say you find a car crash at the bottom of a hill. That happens more often than we would like for it to, but you wouldn't think, oh, something must have caused this. Unless you find out that shortly before this happened, the husband took out a large life insurance policy on his wife, and also had just recently purchased tickets to go to a country with non-extradition, or where they can't pull them out. What is that called? Extradition. Thank you. I knew it wasn't extraction, but with non-extradition laws, and bought a ticket for he and his secretary. Now, all of a sudden, the car crash has more meaning. It's in the context of something else. It has independent specifiability. So when you have both of those together, small probability and independent specifiability, it implies there's some sort of intelligence behind it. There's an agent behind it. That being said, there are approximately, at least I would say, 30 constants of nature. For example, the rest mass of an electron, the charge of a proton, the rate of expansion of the Big Bang, the gravitational constant, etc. The fine-tuning that is required of these is so incredibly precise that if they were off by the smallest of infinitesimal amounts, then no life could exist. No planets could exist. No suns could exist. So to give you an idea, the gravity constant has to be within 10 to the 60th power. So that's a 1 with 60 zeros behind it. If it's off by more than that, then gravity will be either too strong and everything will collapse, or it'll be too great and everything will spread out. In either case, life in any way cannot exist. To give you an idea of 10 to the 60, because these are numbers that we don't normally work with, the number of cells in your body, every single cell in your body, I happen to have more than some of you, I'm working on that, but the number of cells in your body is somewhere around the order of 10 to the 14th. The number of seconds in the age of the universe using the oldest estimates for the age of the universe. Like, this isn't like, oh, young earth creationism, everything just came 6,000. No, we're using the oldest possible estimates. The number of seconds in the universe in its entirety, its entire span, is somewhere around 10 to the 20th. The gravitational constant is 10 to the 60th. And the gravitational constant is one of the most flexible of the constants. The cosmological constant, which defines the expanse of the universe, is 10 to the 120th. The mass and energy distribution is 10 to the 10 to the 120. Yes, the probability of this all happening by chance, first of all, is extraordinarily small, outrageously small. And the thing is, it's not just like if all these constants are off, it's not going to work. Every single constant has to be right. All of the 30 at least have to be precisely what they are, or the whole thing falls apart. And then with probability, as some of you know, when you're combining events, you have to multiply the effects. So you're multiplying all of these probabilities that in themselves are absurd. So as a mathematician, to think that the universe just happens to have the design it has is just by accident is insane. It's absurd. So anyway, let me keep going. It's very, very small probability with independent specifiability, because all of those are necessary for stuff to exist. Okay. By the way, here's where I'll say the thing I was going to say just a moment ago. This is why, when we look at all of this evidence, this is why many atheistic philosophers or naturalistic philosophers or scientists say, oh, there must be a multiverse, so there's infinitely many universes, and in all of the universes, those 30 different things have different values. We just happen to be in the one that has all of the things. But first of all, this is completely ad hoc. There's no reason to believe that there actually is a multiverse. The only reason for it can't be observed, it can't be tested, it's not verifiable, it has nothing to do with the realm of science whatsoever. The only reason that the multiverse solution has been proposed is for two reasons. Number one is to deny the existence of a creator and designer. And number two, because Marvel ran out of ways to tell a story, and they're like, oh no, what are we going to do? We did Endgame. Oh, multiverse. I know what we can do. Those are the only two reasons for a multiverse. Science fiction and fiction. Those are the two reasons for a multiverse explanation. Let me keep going. So if we look out at the universe and its incredible complexity and the incredible design, it's overwhelming, and it suggests that there is a designer, that there is a God. The second one, I'm going to tell you about is, what if instead of looking outward, we look inward? So there's a program called the SETI program. If any of you have seen an old movie now, the movie Contact, they talk about this in the movie a lot. So it's the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And what they did is they have these rules that they set up to know, because they have all of these satellites pointing out into space, trying to figure out, is there intelligent life out there anywhere? Now, there are some rules for how we would know if there's intelligence. Here are some of the rules. So, for example, we need to be able to distinguish intelligent life from randomness and order. So there's randomness, there's order, and there's information. We're looking for information. Randomness would be something like a random sequence, like G, 2, ampersand, exclamation mark, Y, Q. I mean, it's like a good password on Google. That is just random sequence. It's not specific. It's simple. So I'm using simple in a very specific way. Simple means you can measure the simplicity of something by how many commands you would have to give in order to create a certain sequence. So for example, for a random sequence, you need 2 rules. Pick a number, repeat. That's it. That'll give you random. So it's very, very simple. If you have randomness, and if you hear random sounds coming in the satellites, that does not imply that there is intelligence. Order also does not imply intelligence. For example, if you got something like M-E, 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 me. Good description of lots of things. Okay, so here's the thing. While randomness is not specific, order is very specific. It's simple. It only needs 3 orders, right? Print M, print E, repeat. It's periodic. It keeps repeating itself over and over again. And here's the issue with it, is the parts are prior to the whole. So in other words, what I'm saying is ME just keeps getting repeated over and over again. The part is prior to the whole. The part is what defines the whole. You just keep repeating the part. Okay. If you can remove a part and it doesn't affect the whole, the part is prior to the whole. So if you have that, that's just order. That doesn't imply information. What's required for information? If you were pointing out the satellites and you heard spoken back to you, Corey loves Brad. Now, this is very specific. It is complex, right? Print C, print O, print R, print Y, print space, print L, print O, right? It's complex. It would take some time to program it to do that. The whole, and this is the key, the whole is prior to the parts. Right? You have laws of grammar and syntax. You have how letters are combined to spell words. So that the whole is prior to the parts. The idea is if you have something like this, it implies that there is information, there is intelligence that is conveying information. Okay? All right. The number one discovery of biology is that DNA is information bearing. There, in a single strand of DNA, the complexity of it has all of the blueprints, so to speak, to make you you. The color of your hair, the color of your eyes, your height, like everything about you is encoded in each strand of DNA. Volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes of books worth of information encoded inside of every single one of you. It's not random. It's not just a repeating statement over and over. It's information. And if the volumes of information inside of us doesn't tell us that there has to be an information giver, an intelligent designer, I don't know why we're even bothering with the SETI project and trying to find intelligence out there. What would it take to convince you? If we don't think there's an intelligent designer for us, how could we ever believe there's an intelligent designer out there? Implication, God is omniscient and he cares greatly for us. Or in other words, the heavens declare the glory of God. Oh man, guys, I don't know how I'm going to do this. There's still so many more. I'm not going to force you to sit and listen through these, but let me just kind of rattle off some of these. There's the moral argument. If God does not exist, then objective moral values don't exist. But it seems like objective moral values do exist, and the best explanation of that would have to be the existence of God. So just in light of that, there are self-evident cases that moral objectives exist, or objective morals exist. Like, for example, torturing babies for fun is wrong. This isn't a matter of opinion. This isn't a matter of cultural interpretation. Torturing babies for fun is wrong, and if you don't think it's wrong, then you're broken. Something's wrong with you. And anyone who would disagree with that, I think, is very, very deeply disturbed. I could give lots of examples of objective morals that all of you would agree, oh yeah, absolutely that's wrong, or absolutely that's right. I won't do that. Just suffice it to say, I think some of these are so obvious, and we have to convince ourselves that they're not objective. You have to work really hard to be able to say, no, I think torturing babies for fun is okay, which was the defense of the Nazis at Nuremberg. And if you find yourself siding with the Nazis at Nuremberg, there's also something wrong with you. That's a pretty good sign that you're on the wrong side of the argument. It's kind of like when you're agreeing with Judas. It's like, well, maybe you should rethink that argument because Judas isn't really the one that you want to be agreeing with most of the time. So there's self-evident cases of the objectivity of morals. There's the reformer's dilemma. If morals aren't objective, you could never make progress. I think we all want to say, like, the work of Martin Luther King was amazing. The progress that he made in moving towards racial equality, and he really took the United States to a new level. That can't be true if morals are subjective. All he did was change our morals. He didn't actually improve us. We didn't move to a better place with it. So you could never make moral progress unless morals are objective. But it seems like we can make moral progress. So it's a good reason to believe that they are, in fact, objective. Equal human rights. We believe that humans should have equal rights. That has to be based on something incredibly powerful or incredibly amazing, because the fact of the matter is humans are not all equal. Some of us are more athletic, some of us are more intelligent, some of us are taller, some of us are shorter, some of us are smarter, some of us are less smart, some of us are better looking, some of us are not as good looking. I mean, there's so many different things that you could talk about. So what makes us all equal? What brings all of it? It has to be something that is massive. It can't be some trivial thing. And yet we are all committed to this idea of the equal rights of all humans and equal value of all humans. I think it has to be based in the fact that we are all made in the image and likeness of God. What else could it possibly be? Anyway, I don't have time to go through all of these, but the best explanation for the existence of objective moral values would have to be the existence of a moral lawgiver, and that would be God. So this leads us into, some of you may know, the Euthyphro dilemma. Does God command things because they're good, or are things good because God commands them? So if he's commanding them because they're good, that means they could be good apart from him. We don't need God. And if they're only good because he commands them, he could command us to torture babies for fun, and then that would have to become good, and that seems to not make sense either. And so it's like, well, clearly these objective moral values can't really exist because of the Euthyphro dilemma. But the thing is, God doesn't command things because they're good. God commands things because he is good. And the foundation of objective moral values can only be found in his character, in who he is. And the closer we get to being like God, the closer we are to being good. That is the definition of objective moral values, is the character of God. Or to say it another way, God is love. Or as Jesus said, why do you call me good? None is good except for God. So, the implication, God is good. He's omnibenevolent. And God is love. To which I always hear people complain, well, what about the problem of evil? If God is all good, why do these horrible things happen? Why are there these why the Holocaust? Why all these terrible things that have happened in the world? Which I will say, and I don't have the time to fully go into it, I think it's a good argument. I honestly think it's the only atheistic argument. The only argument against God is the problem of evil. But I also am convinced that the problem of evil is itself an argument for the existence of God. Because if something is truly evil, that means there has to be objective measures of good and evil. And the only way you could get an objective measure of good and evil is if God exists to define good and evil. If we are just the accidental byproduct of time and chance, molecules in motion, like no one looks at a cat eating a mouse and thinks, evil. They think, oh, look at that cat eating that mouse. I mean, what else are you going to say? You don't say it's evil for doing that. Those evil black widows. Like, you don't use evil to describe those things. They're just doing what they do. There's nothing different about humans than any other animal on a naturalistic worldview. So you can't do evil, you could just do what humans do. It's not evil, it's not good, it's just, doing what they do. So I think even the problem of evil is an argument for the existence of God. Because it does seem like there are times when people do things and it is evil. But that can only be the case if God does exist. Goodness, let me just finish with this. I'm skipping a couple. And it's really sad because two of them are really fun ones. I'll just tell you what they are. One of them's consciousness. Looking at consciousness, and oh my gosh, that's so cool. But anyway, the other one is the ontological argument, which is just fun because it really drives people crazy. Okay, I'm going to bypass both of those. You could look them up, and you could talk to me about it if you want to. The last one that I do want to mention, because I think this one's actually really important, is the argument from personal experience in miracles. A big part of the reason that tips the scale for me in Pascal's wager is my own personal experience with God, with the Holy Spirit moving in me, telling me things I couldn't possibly know, helping me to do things I couldn't possibly do without him, seeing the miracles that he has done and how he's come through so many different times. Even just the witness of the Holy Spirit in my life. When I've gone to do something that I shouldn't do and he made clear, don't do that. Or when he's moved me to do things that I never would have done before. When I came and I put my faith in him and all of a sudden everything changed. How I saw things, how I understood things, how I processed things. I have the internal testimony of the Holy Spirit and the experience of miracles to tip the scale. And to be honest, that's one of the most powerful ones. I love asking this question. It's much better when you have a lot of people and even a mixed crowd of believers and non-believers. But I'll ask it here. How many of you can say, without any doubt whatsoever, that you witnessed an actual, crazy, unexplainable by anything else other than God did a miracle? How many of you would say that you have witnessed just an outright miracle that there's no way to explain it any other way? If you have, can you raise your hand? Okay, so here's the point. Let's say 99% of you are lying. I don't know why you would lie, especially in a faith that really encourages you to always be honest, to let your yes be your yes and your no be your no. You have nothing to gain from it. In fact, if you believe that God exists, you could even lose. You could get, in trouble with the Father or something. I don't know. But let's say 99% of you are lying. And of the 1% that remains, here's the point. All you need is one. If one person actually experienced a miracle, then God exists. There's no way around it. You just need one. And we have overwhelming the testimony of Christians throughout the ages talking about the miracles that they've witnessed and they've experienced. And we have the evidence of changed lives, drastically changed lives, to provide some extra support, some extra testimony to tip the scales. Here's the point. All things being equal, the rational person should choose to believe that God exists. But what if all things aren't equal? What if they're not? What if there are actually really good reasons to believe that God exists? How much more so should we choose to give our everything for this? Now, I think up to this point, this has given us nothing other than the existence of a God. Is there a reason why we should believe in the existence of the Christian God? That Christianity is true? For me, I think there's one really good reason to believe that Christianity is the religion you should choose, if you want to talk about it that way. And that is the evidence for the resurrection, which is what I'm going to talk about next time.
Thank you for listening. To continue the journey, you can find us online at iamantioch.com or join us next Sunday.